She was just a quiet girl from the wrong side of town, trying to survive at an elite prep school where her grease-stained clothes and second-hand backpack made her an instant target. The wealthy students saw her as nothing more than entertainment, someone they could torment without consequence. But they made one fatal mistake. They never asked who taught her that planes could land anywhere when the family was in danger. A single text message was all it took, and what happened next left the entire school speechless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rusty pickup truck rattled to a stop outside the pristine gates of Westfield Preparatory Academy, its engine coughing one final protest before falling silent. 15-year-old Sarah Mitchell sat in the passenger seat, her stomach churning as she stared through the windshield at the imposing brick buildings that would be her new academic prison for the next 3 years. "You sure about this, kiddo?" her father, Mike Mitchell, asked, his calloused hand still gripping the steering wheel. Oil stains marked his fingernails despite the scrubbing he'd done that morning, and his work shirt bore the faded logo of Mitchell's Auto Repair, the small garage he'd built from nothing over the past 15 years. Sarah nodded, though her throat felt tight. "The scholarship covers everything, Dad. It's too good to pass up." She didn't mention the real reason she'd pushed so hard for this opportunity, the chance to escape the limitations that seemed to follow their family name in their small industrial town of Millbrook. Mike studied his daughter's face, recognizing the determined set of her jaw that she'd inherited from him. "Remember what I taught you about flying," he said quietly. "Sometimes you hit turbulence, but you keep your eyes on the horizon and trust your instruments." Sarah managed a small smile. Her father's aviation background always crept into his advice, even though he'd been grounded from commercial flying for years due to a minor heart condition. Now he fixed cars instead of soaring through clouds, but he still spoke the language of altitude and navigation. The scholarship had been a miracle, a givo, full ride to one of the state's most prestigious preparatory schools, awarded based on her exceptional grades and a compelling essay about overcoming economic hardship. What the admissions committee hadn't mentioned was how it would feel to be the only scholarship kid among students whose parents owned private jets and vacation homes. Sarah shouldered her worn backpack, the same one she'd used since middle school, and stepped out onto the perfectly manicured grounds. The contrast was immediate and overwhelming. Around her, students emerged from luxury cars and SUVs, their uniforms crisp and new, their conversations peppered with references to spring break in Europe and weekend trips to family estates. The main building loomed ahead, its Gothic architecture designed to intimidate and inspire. Sarah had researched every detail about Westfield online, memorizing the layout and reading about its century-long tradition of educating the children of senators, CEOs, and old money families. She'd prepared for the academic rigor, but she hadn't prepared for the crushing weight of not belonging. Her first stop was the administration office, where a stern woman with silver hair and designer glasses looked her up and down with barely concealed disapproval. "Sarah Mitchell," the woman said, consulting her computer screen. "You're our scholarship recipient this year. How interesting." The word interesting hung in the air like a judgment. Sarah forced herself to stand straighter, remembering her father's advice about maintaining altitude in rough weather. "Here's your schedule and locker assignment," the woman continued, sliding a packet across the marble counter. "I trust you. Understand the expectations here at Westfield. Academic excellence is the bare minimum. Social grace and proper conduct are equally important." Sarah clutched the papers and made her way through hallways lined with portraits of distinguished alumni. Students moved in clusters, their conversations flowing effortlessly from a P-calculus to weekend yacht parties. No one looked in her direction, but she could feel their assessment nonetheless. The quick glances that took in her discount store shoes and outdated phone, Her first class was advanced chemistry, held in a laboratory that looked more sophisticated than some college facilities. Sarah slipped into an empty seat near the back, hoping to blend into the shadows. The teacher, Dr. Harrison, was explaining molecular structures when the door opened, and 3 students entered with the confidence of those accustomed to bending rules without consequence. The leader was Madison Blackwell, whose family name graced buildings throughout the city. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves, and her uniform somehow looked more expensive than everyone else's despite being identical. Behind her walked Trevor Ashford, the son of a media mogul, and Brittany Vale, whose father owned a chain of luxury hotels. "Sorry we're late, Dr. Harrison," Madison said with a smile that suggested she wasn't sorry at all. The student council meeting ran over. Dr. Harrison barely looked up from his notes. "Take your seats." The trio scanned the room, and Madison's eyes landed on Sarah. There was something calculating in her gaze, a predator sizing up potential prey. Sarah quickly looked down at her notebook, but she could feel the weight of Madison's attention. The lunch period arrived like a social minefield. The cafeteria buzzed with conversations about ski trips and college prep courses, while Sarah sat alone at a corner table with her brown bag lunch. She'd packed a simple sandwich and an apple humble fare compared to the gourmet salads and sushi being consumed around her. "Excuse me," a voice said above her. Sarah looked up to find Madison standing beside her table, flanked by Trevor and Brittany. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Madison Blackwell." "Sarah Mitchell," she replied cautiously. Madison's smile was sharp as glass. "Mitchell ... that name sounds familiar. Oh wait, isn't there a Mitchell's Auto Repair on the south side? That wouldn't happen to be your family's place, would it?" Heat rose in Sarah's cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, that's my father's shop." "How?" "Quaint," Brittany said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "It must be such a change for you, being here with us." Trevor leaned against the table, his expensive watch catching the light. "I bet you've never seen anything like this place before. Don't worry, you'll learn to fit in eventually. We'll make sure of it." There was something ominous in his tone that made Sarah's skin crawl. Madison's smile widened, and Sarah realized she'd just been marked as their newest target. "We should let you get back to your ... lunch," Madison said, glancing at Sarah's simple sandwich with mock sympathy. "See you around, scholarship girl." The trio walked away, their laughter floating back across the cafeteria. Sarah sat frozen, her appetite completely gone. She understood now that her academic credentials meant nothing here. She was an outsider, a curiosity to be studied and ultimately discarded. The rest of the day passed in a blur of whispered comments and pointed stares. In English class, when Sarah answered a question about Shakespearean themes, Madison rolled her eyes and stage whispered to Trevor, "Someone's trying too hard." In history, when the teacher praised Sarah's essay on economic inequality, Brittany made a comment about personal experience being so valuable. By the time the final bell rang, Sarah felt emotionally battered. She gathered her books slowly, watching her classmates make plans for activities she couldn't afford and social events she wasn't invited to. The divide between her world and theirs seemed as vast as the distance between earth and sky. Walking to the parking lot, she spotted her father's truck among the sea of luxury vehicles. Mike was leaning against the driver's side, still wearing his work clothes, and Sarah felt a complex mix of love and embarrassment. She loved her father fiercely, but in this moment, his presence only highlighted how much she didn't belong. "How was the first day?" Mike asked as she climbed into the passenger seat. Sarah stared out the window at Madison and her friends climbing into a pristine Range Rover. "It was fine," she lied. "Just getting adjusted." Mike studied her face in the rearview mirror, his pilot's training making him sensitive to subtle changes in expression and tone. He'd spent years reading weather patterns and mechanical gauges, skills that translated surprisingly well to reading his daughter's moods. "You know," he said quietly, "when I was flying commercial routes, I sometimes had to land at airports where I wasn't exactly welcome. Small regional places where they thought commercial pilots were just bus drivers in the sky. But I always remembered that my wings were earned, not given." Sarah turned to look at her father, seeing past the oil stains, and work clothes to the man who had once commanded aircraft worth millions of dollars. He might fix engines now instead of flying them, but he still carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had once held lives in his hands at 30,000 feet. "What happened to those airports?" she asked. Mike smiled, starting the engine. "Eventually, they realized that respect isn't about where you come from. It's about how you handle yourself when the conditions get rough." As they drove away from Westfield Preparatory Academy, Sarah didn't know that Madison Blackwell was already planning her next move, or that the harassment she'd experienced today was merely the opening act of a much larger production. She also didn't know that her father's seemingly simple advice about aviation would prove more prophetic than either of them could imagine. The truck rattled down the tree-lined street, carrying a mechanic's daughter away from her first encounter with a world that didn't want her. But somewhere in the distance, the sound of aircraft engines hummed against the horizon, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful forces arrive when you least expect them. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Westfield with renewed determination. She'd spent the evening researching her classmates online, learning about their families' business empires and social connections. Knowledge was power, and she refused to be caught off guard again. Her first period was advanced calculus, a subject where her natural aptitude could finally shine. Sarah had always excelled in mathematics, finding comfort in its logical certainty. As she worked through complex equations on the board, she felt a momentary sense of belonging until she noticed Madison and Trevor exchanging knowing glances. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After class, as Sarah gathered her books, she discovered a note tucked inside her calculus textbook. "Nice job, calculator girl. Too bad numbers can't buy you class." The handwriting was feminine and precise, clearly Madison's work. Sarah crumpled the note and headed to her locker, only to find it slightly ajar. Inside, her carefully organized supplies had been rearranged, and her spare pencils were missing. Small acts of sabotage, designed to be just annoying enough to rattle her without leaving obvious evidence. During biology, Dr. Peterson assigned lab partners for a semester-long project on genetics. Sarah watched hopefully as pairs formed around her, but somehow she remained partnerless until only one person was left: Jacob Torres, a quiet boy who seemed as much an outsider as herself. "Looks like it's you and me," Jacob said with a shy smile. He had dark hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and Sarah noticed his worn sneakers and slightly frayed backpack strap. "Are you a scholarship too?" Sarah asked quietly. Jacob nodded. "Academic merit, like you. My parents own a small restaurant in the Latino district downtown." He paused, then added, "I heard what Madison said to you yesterday. She did the same thing to me last year, but I learned to stay invisible. How do you do that? You don't stand out. Don't answer questions in class. Don't show you're smarter than them. Don't remind them you exist." Jacob's voice carried the weight of hard-learned experience. It's survival. But Sarah couldn't embrace invisibility. When their biology teacher asked about DNA replication, her hand shot up automatically. When English class discussed symbolism in literature, she couldn't help but offer insights that impressed even the instructor. Academic excellence was part of her identity, the very thing that had earned her place here. Madison noticed, and her irritation grew with each passing day. The harassment escalated gradually. Sarah's locker combination was somehow discovered and changed, leaving her late for classes. Her homework disappeared from her backpack, forcing her to explain missing assignments to skeptical teachers. In the cafeteria, students would accidentally bump into her, sending her tray clattering to the floor. The worst part was the isolation. Other students, even those who might have been natural allies, kept their distance. Sarah understood associating with the target meant risking becoming one themselves. Westfield's social hierarchy was rigid and unforgiving. One Thursday afternoon, Madison cornered Sarah in the empty music wing after school. Trevor and Brittany flanked her like bodyguards, their expressions cold and calculating. "We need to talk," Madison said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You're not getting the message." Sarah clutched her books tighter. "What message? That you don't belong here?" Madison stepped closer, invading Sarah's personal space. "This isn't some public school where being smart is enough. Westfield has standards, social standards that you'll never meet." Brittany smirked. "Your father fixes cars, Sarah. Our fathers own companies that employ thousands of people. There's a difference." Trevor pulled out his phone, scrolling to a photo of Mitchell's auto repair that he'd obviously taken recently. The small garage looked shabby and rundown compared to the gleaming corporate headquarters his father owned. "This is where you come from. Grease and rust and broken down cars." "At least my father works for his money," Sarah shot back, surprising herself with her boldness. Madison's eyes flashed dangerously. "How dare you? Madison, what's going on here?" All four students turned to see Mr. Hartwell, the music teacher, approaching with a concerned expression. Madison immediately shifted her posture, transforming from predator to innocent student with practiced ease. "Oh, hi, Mr. Hartwell," she said sweetly. "We were just welcoming Sarah to our school, weren't we?" She looked at Sarah meaningfully, a clear warning in her gaze. Sarah nodded stiffly, understanding that reporting this conversation would only make things worse. Teachers at Westfield, she'd already learned, were reluctant to challenge students whose families funded new buildings and endowed scholarships. Mr. Hartwell looked unconvinced, but didn't press further. "Well, the building will be locking up soon. You should all head out." As they walked toward the exit, Madison fell into step beside Sarah. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for," she whispered, "but don't think this is over. In fact, it's just beginning." That evening, Sarah sat in her small bedroom above her father's garage, trying to focus on homework while the sounds of Mike working late filtered up through the floor. The familiar noises of clanking tools and running engines had always been comforting, but tonight they reminded her of the gulf between her world and Westfield's. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Poor little scholarship girl. "Daddy's calling." "Oh wait, he's too busy under a car hood to answer." Attached was another photo of the garage, this one taken through the window showing Mike bent over an engine, his work clothes dirty and his face streaked with grease. Sarah's hands shook as she stared at the image. They'd been watching her family, documenting their lives like specimens under a microscope. The violation felt profound and personal. She climbed down the narrow stairs to the garage, where Mike was finishing up work on a Honda Civic. The space smelled of motor oil and metal polish, scents that had defined her childhood. "Dad," she said quietly. Mike looked up from the engine, immediately noticing her distressed expression. He wiped his hands on a rag and gave her his full attention, something she'd always loved about her father. When she spoke, everything else ceased to exist. "Tell me about flying again," she said. "About the worst turbulence you ever hit." Mike leaned against the workbench, his eyes growing distant. 1998, flying from Denver to Chicago. Hit a storm system. That felt like the plane was in a washing machine. Passengers were panicking. Flight attendants could barely stand up. "What did you do?" "Same thing I always did. Trusted my instruments, maintained course, and remembered that storms don't last forever." He studied her face. "Why do you ask?" Sarah considered telling him everything, The harassment, the photos, the growing sense that Madison and her friends were planning something bigger. But looking at her father's kind, tired face, she couldn't bring herself to burden him with her problems. "Just curious," she lied. "School's been challenging." Mike nodded slowly, and Sarah suspected he knew more than he was letting on. Pilots were trained observers, after all. "You know," he said, returning to the engine, "some of the roughest flights I ever had turned out to be the most important ones. They taught me things about flying and about myself that I never could have learned in calm skies." The next morning brought a new level of psychological warfare. Sarah arrived at school to find her locker decorated with grease stains and a sign reading, "Garage Girls Locker." The custodial staff had already been alerted and was cleaning it off, but the damage was done. Students walked by pointing and snickering, and Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. In the first period, she discovered that someone had accessed her school email and sent embarrassing messages to several classmates, signing them with her name. The messages were carefully crafted to be humiliating without being overtly cruel, expressing romantic interest in boys who were dating other girls, volunteering for unpopular committee assignments, asking for financial help with school supplies. By lunch, Sarah was emotionally exhausted. She found Jacob in the library, their usual refuge from the cafeteria's social minefield. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" Jacob asked without looking up from his chemistry textbook. "How did you know?" "Because that's what they do. They escalate until you break or transfer out." Jacob finally met her eyes. 3 scholarship kids have left Westfield in the past 2 years. Madison has a perfect record. Sarah stared at him in shock. "And nobody stops her? How can they?" "She's careful, never does anything that leaves clear evidence. And when you're the daughter of someone who donated a whole wing to the school." Jacob shrugged helplessly. That afternoon, Sarah's biology grade was mysteriously changed in the computer system, dropping her A to a C. When she tried to explain to Dr. Peterson, he seemed genuinely confused, but claimed he had no record of her higher scores. "Perhaps you're misremembering," he suggested kindly. "The transition to Westfield's academic standards can be challenging for transfer students." Sarah left his classroom feeling defeated. Madison's campaign was working. She was being systematically erased, her achievements questioned, her presence at the school undermined at every turn. Walking to the parking lot, she passed Madison and her friends celebrating beside their luxury cars. They were planning something for the weekend, a party at Madison's family estate, where the guest list represented the cream of young society. "Too bad we can't invite everyone," Madison said loudly, clearly intending for Sarah to overhear. "But some people just wouldn't fit in with our crowd." As Sarah climbed into her father's truck, she realized that surviving Westfield wasn't just about academics anymore. It was about withstanding a sustained psychological assault designed to make her question her worth, her place, and her right to be there. But Madison Blackwell had made one crucial miscalculation. She assumed that Sarah's quiet demeanor meant she was weak, that her humble background meant she had no powerful allies. She had no idea that the man picking up his daughter every day in that rusty truck had once commanded multi-million-dollar aircraft and still maintained connections throughout the aviation industry, connections that could move heaven and earth. When family was threatened, the storm was building. And soon Madison would learn that some kinds of turbulence can bring down even the most confident flights. The following Monday brought Westfield's annual science fair, a prestigious event that attracted judges from nearby universities and potential college recruiters. Sarah had spent weeks perfecting her project on atmospheric pressure dynamics, a subject close to her heart, given her father's aviation background. It was her chance to prove herself academically in a way that couldn't be undermined or erased. Horror. Display booth in the gymnasium looked modest compared to the elaborate presentations around her. While other students showcased projects clearly assisted by professional tutors or family connections, Sarah's work was entirely her own detailed charts, careful calculations, and a working model that demonstrated pressure changes at different altitudes. Dr. Williams from the State University paused at Sarah's booth, his eyebrows raising as he examined her methodology. "This is impressive work, Miss Mitchell, Sarah Mitchell. Well, Miss Mitchell, your understanding of atmospheric dynamics is remarkably sophisticated. Have you considered studying aerospace engineering?" Sarah's heart soared. "It's my dream, actually. My father used to be a commercial pilot, and I've always been fascinated by flight mechanics." Dr. Williams made several notes on his evaluation sheet. "I'll be sure to mention your work to our admissions committee. Projects like this demonstrate real potential." From across the gymnasium, Madison watched the interaction with growing fury. She'd expected her own project, a genetic study that had clearly received extensive outside help, to dominate the judges' attention. Instead, they were lingering at the scholarship girl's humble booth, genuinely impressed by work that Madison couldn't dismiss as inferior. Trevor sidled up beside her. "Looks like a garage girl is getting some attention." "Not for long," Madison muttered during the lunch break. While students and judges mingled in the cafeteria, Sarah returned to check on her display. What she found made her stomach drop. Her carefully constructed atmospheric pressure model had been accidentally knocked over, its delicate components scattered across the floor. The accompanying research papers were soaked with what appeared to be spilled soda. "Oh no!" Madison appeared suddenly, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "What happened here? How terrible!" Several other students gathered around, their expressions ranging from genuine concern to poorly hidden amusement. Sarah knelt among the wreckage of weeks of work, her hands shaking as she tried to salvage what she could. "Maybe you can explain to the judges what your project was supposed to show," Brittany suggested with mock helpfulness. "I'm sure they'll understand." Sarah looked up to find Madison's cold smile. There was triumph in those blue eyes, and Sarah finally understood the full scope of what she was facing. This wasn't just casual bullying, it was systematic destruction, designed to eliminate any possibility of her success at Westfield. When Dr. Williams returned for the afternoon judging session, he found Sarah attempting to explain her project, using waterlogged notes and broken pieces. The passion in her voice was evident, but the physical evidence of her work was gone. "I'm sorry, Miss Mitchell," he said kindly. "Without the working model, it's difficult to properly evaluate the project's merit." Sarah nodded, forcing back tears. She watched Dr. Williams move on to Madison's pristine display, where everything remained perfectly intact and professionally presented. That evening, Sarah sat in her bedroom, staring at the broken pieces of her atmospheric pressure gauge. The device had taken her 3 weeks to build, using parts from her father's garage and careful measurements she'd calculated herself. Now it was just expensive scrap metal. Her phone buzzed with a group text that had somehow been sent to half the school. "Attention, scholarship students, please remember that Westfield maintains high standards. Some projects clearly don't meet our academic expectations. Better luck next time." The message was sent from a burner account, but Sarah recognized Madison's writing style. Attached were photos of Sarah's destroyed project with mocking captions about atmospheric disasters and pressure failures. For the first time since arriving at Westfield, Sarah broke down completely. The tears came in waves: frustration, humiliation, and a deep sense of injustice that cut to her core. She'd worked so hard, played by every rule, and still they'd found a way to destroy her efforts. A soft knock on her door interrupted her crying. "Sarah, can I come in?" Mike entered to find his daughter surrounded by the debris of her project, her face streaked with tears. His expression shifted from concern to something much harder and more dangerous. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. Settling onto the edge of her bed, the whole story poured out: the systematic harassment, the destroyed project, the constant psychological warfare, designed to break her spirit. Sarah had intended to handle it alone, but the dam had finally burst. Mike listened without interruption, his jaw tightening with each detail. When Sarah finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring at the broken gauge in his hands. "You?" "No," he said finally. "When I was flying commercial routes, we had protocols for dealing with hostile situations. Sometimes passengers would become aggressive, threaten crew members, and endanger other travelers. What did you do?" "We had procedures. Quiet, efficient procedures that resolved the situation without drama." Mike's voice carried a weight Sarah had never heard before. The most important thing was protecting innocent people from those who thought they could abuse their power. He stood up, gently taking the broken pieces of her project. "I think it's time I had a conversation with your school." "Dad, you can't. It'll just make things worse." Mike looked at his daughter with eyes that had once navigated storms at 30,000 feet. "Sometimes, Sarah, making things better requires a different kind of turbulence." The next morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Sarah's mood as she reluctantly prepared for another day at Westfield. She'd barely slept, replaying the destruction of her project and wondering if Jacob was right. Maybe invisibility was. The only survival strategy. At school, Madison was basking in the glow of her science fair victory. Her genetics project had won first place, earning her recognition from university representatives and a featured spot in the school newsletter. She held court in the hallway, accepting congratulations while shooting satisfied glances in Sarah's direction. "Did you hear about the atmospheric disaster?" Trevor was saying loudly enough for Sarah to overhear. "Apparently some people's projects just can't handle the pressure." The group laughed at their own cleverness, but there was an edge to their celebration. They'd won this battle decisively, yet something about Sarah's reaction or lack thereof seemed to unsettle them. During third period of P chemistry, Sarah sat quietly while Dr. Harrison discussed molecular bonding. She'd stopped raising her hand, stopped volunteering answers, stopped drawing attention to herself in any way. The spark that had defined her academic identity was dimming. Madison noticed the change and felt a surge of satisfaction. This was how it always ended. The outsiders eventually learned their place and faded into the background, broken but grateful to simply be tolerated. But at 10:47 a.m., something unprecedented happened at Westfield Preparatory Academy. The distinctive sound of rotor blades echoed across the campus, growing louder by the second. Students in every classroom turned toward the windows, their conversation stopping mid-sentence as a sleek helicopter appeared over the tree-line. In the chemistry lab, Sarah's head snapped up at the familiar sound. She'd grown up around aircraft engines and could identify different types of planes and helicopters by their acoustic signatures alone. This was a Bell 407, a high-performance aircraft, typically used for corporate transport or emergency services. The helicopter circled the campus once, then descended toward the main parking lot with military precision. Students pressed against windows throughout the building, phones appearing as they recorded the unexpected spectacle. Madison watched from her calculus classroom, a frown creasing her perfect features. What's some helicopter doing here? Through the window, she could see a tall man in a crisp button-down shirt and aviator sunglasses stepping out of the aircraft. He moved with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command, and even from a distance, there was something unmistakably authoritative about his presence. Probably some parent showing off, Trevor muttered, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. In the chemistry lab, Sarah stared at the figure walking across the parking lot with growing recognition and disbelief. The purposeful stride, the squared shoulders, the way he surveyed his surroundings with trained awareness, she knew that silhouette better than any other. Her father had come to Westfield Preparatory Academy, and he'd arrived in a way that no one could ignore or dismiss. Dr. Harrison tried to regain control of his classroom. "Students, please return to your seats. I'm sure it's just but his words were drowned out by the excited chatter of teenagers who'd never seen anything this dramatic happen at their carefully controlled school. Some were already posting videos to social media, while others speculated about which family might own such an impressive aircraft. Sarah remained frozen at her desk, her mind racing. Her father had said he would handle the situation, but she'd never imagined anything like this. Mike Mitchell, the quiet mechanic who fixed cars and spoke in aviation metaphors, had just landed a helicopter at one of the state's most exclusive schools. Madison's smug confidence was beginning to crack as she watched the man approach the main building. There was something about his bearing, his obvious competence with the aircraft, that didn't fit her assumptions about Sarah's background. "Who is that?" Brittany whispered. Madison didn't answer, but for the first time since meeting Sarah Mitchell, she felt a flutter of genuine uncertainty. The game had suddenly changed, and she didn't understand the new rules. In the principal's office, Mrs. Crawford was fielding increasingly frantic calls from parents and school board members demanding to know why an unauthorized aircraft had landed on school property. Security protocols were being reviewed, and emergency procedures were being quietly activated. None of them were prepared for the conversation that was about to unfold in the administration building, where a former commercial pilot was walking through the front doors with the quiet confidence of a man who'd spent decades making life-or-death decisions at altitude. The storm Sarah's father had promised was about to break, and Westfield Preparatory Academy would never be quite the same. Mike Mitchell walked through the marble hallways of Westfield Preparatory Academy with the measured pace of a man who understood that true authority didn't need to announce itself. His aviator sunglasses reflected the ornate chandeliers overhead, and students instinctively stepped aside as he passed, sensing something different about this visitor. The administrative assistant behind the reception desk looked up with barely concealed panic. "Sir, I'm sorry, but you can't just. I need to speak with Principal Crawford immediately," Mike said, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations. "My name is Captain Michael Mitchell." The title hung in the air with unexpected weight. This wasn't just another parent making demands. This was someone whose presence commanded respect in ways the assistant couldn't quite articulate. "Do you have an appointment?" she stammered. Mike's expression didn't change. "My daughter is Sarah Mitchell. I believe the principal will want to see me." Within minutes, Principal Crawford emerged from her office, her usual composure slightly shaken by the helicopter landing and the growing crowd of curious students gathering in the hallways. She was a woman who prided herself on maintaining order, but nothing in her administrative training had prepared her for this situation. "Mr. Mitchell, I presume? I understand you're Sarah's father. Perhaps we should discuss whatever concerns you have in my office." "That would be appropriate," Mike agreed, following her into the wood-paneled room that spoke of old money and older traditions. "Principal." Crawford settled behind her imposing desk, attempting to reclaim the authority that felt somehow diminished in this man's presence. "I must say, your arrival has caused quite a disruption. Landing a helicopter on school property without permission. The helicopter belongs to Reynolds Aviation Services," Mike interrupted smoothly. "I have a commercial pilot's license and full authority to operate that aircraft. As for permission, I was under the impression that Westfield welcomed parents who took an active interest in their children's education." Crawford blinked, momentarily off balance. She'd assumed this was some kind of stunt, a mechanic trying to impress his daughter's wealthy classmates. The reality was proving more complex. "Of course we welcome parental involvement, but there are proper channels, like the channels my daughter has been using to report systematic harassment and sabotage." Mike's tone remained conversational, but there was steel underneath. The same channels that seem remarkably ineffective when the perpetrators come from influential families. Crawford's face flushed slightly. "I'm not sure what you're implying, But Westfield maintains strict anti-bullying policies. Mike opened the leather portfolio he'd been carrying and placed a series of photographs on the desk. Crawford's eyes widened as she recognized images of graffitied lockers, destroyed projects, and harassing text messages, all meticulously documented with timestamps and metadata. "My daughter kept records," Mike explained calmly, "as did several witnesses, including security footage from the science fair that shows Madison Blackwell deliberately destroying Sarah's project while the judges were at lunch." Crawford stared at the evidence, her administrative confidence crumbling. "How did you obtain security footage?" "I have contacts throughout the aviation industry, Principal Crawford. Some of them have moved into security consulting. When a former commercial pilot asks for help protecting his daughter, people tend to respond." The principal realized she was dealing with someone far more connected and resourceful than she'd anticipated. The quiet mechanic narrative was revealing itself as a carefully maintained facade. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Mitchell?" Mike leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I want justice for my daughter. Real justice. Not the kind of administrative lip service that protects donors' children while sacrificing scholarship students. That's a serious accusation. It's a documented pattern." Mike placed another folder on the desk. 3 scholarship students have transferred out of Westfield in the past 2 years after similar harassment campaigns. All 3 families filed complaints that were dismissed or minimized. All 3 cases involved the same group of students. Crawford felt the walls closing in. The Blackwell family's donations had funded the new science wing. The Ashford family's media connections could destroy the school's reputation with a single negative story. How was she supposed to discipline students whose families held the school's future in their hands? "These are complex situations," she began weakly. "Sometimes personality conflicts. Destroying someone's science project isn't a personality conflict." Mike interrupted. "It's deliberate sabotage. Hacking into school email accounts to send embarrassing messages isn't a prank, it's harassment. And using family influence to change grades in the computer system isn't a misunderstanding, it's academic fraud." Each accusation hit Crawford like a physical blow. The evidence was overwhelming, and she realized that Mike Mitchell had done his homework with the thoroughness of a trained pilot conducting a pre-flight inspection. Meanwhile, throughout the school, news of the helicopter landing was spreading like wildfire. Students clustered around windows trying to catch glimpses of the mysterious aircraft, while teachers struggled to maintain classroom discipline. In Madison's AP government class, she sat rigidly in her seat, her mind racing. Something about the pilot's bearing when he'd stepped out of the helicopter had triggered an uncomfortable recognition. This wasn't some hired charter service, this was someone who owned that aircraft's operation with complete confidence. Trevor leaned over to whisper, "Think it's connected to Garage Girl?" Madison didn't answer, but a cold dread was building in her stomach. She'd built her entire strategy around the assumption that Sarah Mitchell was isolated and powerless. If that assumption was wrong, if Sarah's family had connections and resources Madison hadn't anticipated, then the game had just become much more dangerous. Brittany was frantically texting her mother, trying to get information about the helicopter and its pilot. Her family's social network usually provided intelligence about anyone important in the region, but she was coming up empty. Back in the principal's office, Mike was methodically dismantling every excuse and deflection Crawford attempted. "Blackwell family has been generous to this school," Crawford tried. "Madison is generally a good student. Good students don't destroy other people's work out of jealousy," Mike said flatly. "And generous donors don't get to purchase immunity for their children's criminal behavior." "Criminal behavior is rather strong language." Mike placed his final document on the desk, a formal complaint filed with the county sheriff's office, detailing harassment, property destruction, and computer crimes. "The legal system will determine." "Appropriate language, Principal Crawford." I've documented everything, the systematic targeting, the property damage, the unauthorized access to school systems. The district attorney's office is reviewing the case." Crawford stared at the legal paperwork, realizing that this situation had escalated far beyond her ability to manage quietly. Mike Mitchell wasn't just an angry parent, he was someone who understood systems, procedures, and leverage. "What do you propose we do?" she asked quietly. "You're going to call Madison Blackwell, Trevor Ashford, and Brittany Vale to this office immediately," Mike said. "They're going to hear exactly what consequences their actions have earned. And then you're going to implement real anti-bullying measures with actual enforcement, not just pretty policies that protect the wealthy kids." Crawford reached for her phone with trembling fingers. As she dialed the classroom extensions, she wondered how a simple bullying situation had turned into a crisis that threatened to expose the school's entire power structure. In the chemistry lab, Sarah watched through the window as her father's helicopter sat like a statement of intent on the school's pristine grounds. Students continued to gather and gawk, their phones capturing every angle of the aircraft that had shattered Westfield's carefully maintained atmosphere of exclusivity. Dr. Harrison had given up trying to continue the lesson. "Miss Mitchell," he said quietly, "I believe you're wanted in the principal's office." Sarah nodded, gathering her books with hands that shook slightly. She'd asked her father to handle the situation, but she'd never imagined anything this dramatic. As she walked through hallways filled with staring students, she realized that her days of invisibility at Westfield were definitively over. The question now was whether the revelation of her father's true capabilities would finally bring justice or simply escalate the conflict to a level where even more damage could be done. One thing was certain: Madison Blackwell's carefully orchestrated campaign of harassment was about to face its first real opposition, and the wealthy students who thought themselves untouchable were about to discover that some kinds of power couldn't be bought or inherited. They came from 30,000 feet, carried by someone who understood that protecting family sometimes required a willingness to fly directly into the storm. The summons came over the intercom like a death. "Now, Madison Blackwell, Trevor Ashford, and Brittany Vale, please report to the principal's office immediately." In her AP government classroom, Madison felt her blood turn to ice. The timing wasn't coincidental: first the helicopter, now this urgent summons. Her carefully constructed world of privilege and immunity was beginning to crack, and she could feel the foundation shifting beneath her feet. Trevor's face had gone pale. Despite his family's media empire, he'd always been a follower rather than a leader, content to bask in Madison's reflected power. Now walking through hallways filled with curious stares and whispered conversations about the mysterious helicopter, he felt exposed and vulnerable for the first time in his privileged life. Brittany clutched her designer bag like a shield, her usual confidence evaporating with each step toward the administrative wing. She'd tried calling her mother twice during the walk, but both calls had gone straight to voicemail, an unprecedented occurrence that filled her with dread. As they approached the principal's office, they could see Sarah Mitchell sitting in one of the waiting area chairs, her father standing beside her with the relaxed alertness of someone completely comfortable in high-stress situations. Up close, Mike Mitchell was even more imposing than he'd appeared from the classroom windows. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of making split-second decisions in life or death situations. Madison tried to summon her usual imperious attitude. "I don't understand why we're here," she announced to the administrative assistant. "We haven't done anything wrong." Mike turned his gaze toward her, and Madison felt her words die in her throat. His eyes held the steady intensity of someone who'd navigated storms at cruising altitude and emerged victorious. There was no anger in his expression, just the calm assessment of a trained professional evaluating a problem that needed solving. "Madison Blackwell," he said, not as a question but as a statement of identification. "Trevor Ashford, Brittany Vale." He knew exactly who they were. And that knowledge felt somehow ominous. Principal Crawford's office door opened, and she emerged looking haggard and defeated. "Please come in, all of you." The office felt smaller with 6 people crowded inside. Madison automatically moved toward one of the chairs facing the principal's desk, but Mike's voice stopped her. "I think you should remain standing," he said. "Quietly, this won't take long." Crawford cleared her throat nervously. "Students, we need to discuss some serious allegations about your behavior towards Sarah Mitchell." Madison lifted her chin defiantly. "I don't know what she's told you, but she didn't tell me anything," Mike interrupted, his voice cutting through her protest like a blade. "She didn't need to. You documented everything yourselves." He gestured toward the principal's desk, where the photographs and evidence were still spread out like an indictment. Madison's eyes widened as she recognized images of her handiwork, the graffitied locker, the destroyed science project, screenshots of the harassing text messages. "How did you get those?" Trevor stammered. "Security cameras, digital forensics, basic investigative procedures." Mike's tone was matter-of-fact, as if he were explaining instrument readings to a student pilot. "The question isn't how I obtained the evidence, it's why you created it in the first place." Brittany found her voice, though it came out smaller than usual. We didn't mean any real harm. You destroyed weeks of my daughter's work. You violated her privacy. You used your family's influence to manipulate school records." Mike's calm recitation of facts was somehow more terrifying than shouting would have been. "Tell me, Miss Vale, what part of that didn't involve real harm?" Madison rallied, drawing on years of privilege and protection. "You can't prove we did anything intentionally. And even if we did, there are proper channels for handling student disputes. You can't just fly in here like some kind of vigilante." "Vigilante?" Mike's eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm a licensed commercial pilot operating a legally registered aircraft. I've filed formal complaints through appropriate law enforcement channels. I've documented evidence of criminal harassment and property destruction. Which part of that strikes you as vigilantism?" Principal Crawford shifted uncomfortably. "The students do have a point about proper procedures. The same procedures that ignored 3 previous scholarship students who were harassed out of this school." Mike's gaze shifted to Crawford with laser focus. "The same procedures that somehow failed to notice obvious patterns of targeting and abuse?" He turned back to the 3 students who were beginning to understand that their usual protective shields, family wealth, school politics, administrative reluctance to challenge powerful donors, were proving useless against someone who operated outside their familiar system. "Let me explain your current situation," Mike continued, his voice maintaining that same unnerving calm. "The county sheriff's office has opened an investigation into computer crimes, specifically unauthorized access to school email systems. The district attorney is reviewing charges for harassment, property destruction, and conspiracy. Your parents' lawyers are probably being contacted as we speak." Trevor's face went white. "You can't be serious." "It was just school stuff, pranks." "Pranks?" Mike pulled out his phone and scrolled to a video file. "This is security footage from the science fair. Watch carefully." The video showed Madison deliberately approaching Sarah's display during the lunch break, looking around to ensure she wasn't being observed, then systematically destroying the atmospheric pressure model. Her actions were clearly intentional and malicious, no accidental bump or innocent mistake. Madison stared at the screen in horror. She'd been so focused on avoiding teacher supervision that she'd completely forgotten about the security cameras mounted throughout the gymnasium. "The timestamp shows this occurred at 12:47 p.m., Mike noted. 43 minutes before judging resumed. You had plenty of time to reconsider your actions, but you chose to complete the destruction." Brittany was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "We didn't know it would go this far. We just wanted her to fit in, to understand her place." "Her place?" Sarah spoke for the first time since entering the office, her voice steady despite The emotional weight of the moment. My place is wherever my grades and character earn me the right to be, not wherever you decide I'm allowed to exist. Madison whirled toward her, desperation making her vicious. You think this changes anything? You think one helicopter landing makes you one of us? You're still just a mechanic's daughter from the wrong side of town. And you're a bully who's about to face real consequences for the first time in your privileged life, Mike said quietly. The difference is, my daughter earned her place. Here through merit, you've just proven you don't deserve yours. Principal Crawford finally found her voice. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Mitchell? Mike turned to face her directly. Immediate suspension for all 3 students, pending a full investigation. Mandatory anger management and anti-bullying counseling. Community service hours to be completed at local organizations that serve underprivileged youth. And formal apologies, not the kind you read from a script, but genuine acknowledgement of the harm they've caused. And if we refuse? Madison asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Then you'll face the legal consequences without any mitigation from school cooperation, Mike replied. Computer crimes carry serious penalties, especially when they involve minors. Harassment charges can affect college admissions. Property destruction requires restitution. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Your choice is between learning from this experience and growing as human beings, or letting it define you as the kind of people who abuse power and hurt others for entertainment. Crawford looked at the 3 students, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. Without their usual confident swagger, they appeared exactly as they were spoiled children who'd never faced meaningful consequences for their actions. The suspensions will begin immediately, she said finally. Security will escort you to clean out your lockers. Your parents will be contacted to discuss the full scope of disciplinary actions. As security officers arrived to escort the 3 students out, Madison made one final attempt to salvage her dignity. This isn't over, she hissed at Sarah. My family, your family, Mike interrupted, will be receiving a very detailed report about your behavior, along with documentation of the legal exposure you've created for them. I suspect they'll be more concerned with damage control than mounting any kind of retaliation. As the bullies were led away, their faces showing the first real fear they'd ever experienced at Westfield, the office fell into silence. Principal. Crawford stared at the evidence scattered across her desk, finally understanding the full scope of what had been happening under her leadership. What happens now? Sarah asked quietly. Mike placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. Now, you get to finish your education without looking over your shoulder. You get to be judged on your merits instead of someone else's prejudices. He looked at Principal Crawford. And this school gets to decide whether it wants to be an institution that protects bullies, or one that actually lives up to its stated values. Crawford nodded slowly. We'll implement the changes you've outlined. Real anti-bullying measures with actual enforcement. Anonymous reporting systems. Regular reviews of social dynamics among students. See that you do, Mike said, because I'll be watching. And next time, I won't need to land a helicopter to get your attention. As they walked out of the administrative building together, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. The helicopter sat in the parking lot like a symbol of justice delivered from above, reminding everyone at Westfield that some kinds of power couldn't be bought or inherited. They had to be earned through character, competence, and the courage to stand up for what was right. The storm had passed, but its effects would be felt at Westfield Preparatory Academy for years to come. 3 weeks after the helicopter landing that changed everything at Westfield Preparatory Academy, Sarah Mitchell walked through the same hallways that had once felt like a gauntlet of hostility. The transformation was remarkable, not just in the school's atmosphere, but in Sarah herself. Where once students had either ignored her or participated in her harassment, now they offered genuine smiles and respectful nods. The story of Captain Mitchell's dramatic intervention had spread throughout the school and beyond, becoming local legend. More importantly, it had fundamentally altered the social dynamics that had made bullying possible. Sarah called Emma Rodriguez, a sophomore who had been too intimidated to speak to her before. "Are you ready for the Academic Olympics tryouts this afternoon?" Sarah smiled, adjusting the new backpack her father had bought her, not because the old one was broken, but because she deserved to carry her achievements in something that reflected her worth. "Absolutely. I've been looking forward to it all week." The Academic Olympics team had been Madison Blackwell's exclusive domain, a collection of wealthy students who treated intellectual competition as another form of social networking. With Madison suspended and facing ongoing legal proceedings, the team had been restructured to actually focus on academic merit rather than family connections. In the weeks following the confrontation, the full scope of changes at Westfield had become clear. Principal Crawford had implemented a comprehensive anti-bullying program developed by education consultants, not the cosmetic policy changes she'd initially suggested, but real structural reforms with teeth. Anonymous reporting systems allowed students to document harassment without fear of retaliation. Regular social climate surveys tracked bullying patterns across different demographics. Most importantly, disciplinary actions were now applied equally regardless of family donations or social status. The Blackwell family had quietly withdrawn their daughter from Westfield entirely, enrolling her in a boarding school across the country, where her reputation couldn't follow her. Trevor Ashford had returned after completing his suspension and mandatory counseling, but he was a changed person, quieter, more thoughtful, no longer seeking validation through cruelty. Brittany Vale had surprised everyone by becoming one of the program's success stories. Her community service hours at a local youth center had exposed her to perspectives she'd never encountered, and she'd emerged with genuine empathy and a commitment to using her privilege constructively. Sarah found Jacob Torres waiting by her locker, a wide grin on his face. "Did you hear the news?" "What news?" "Dr. Williams from the State University called the school this morning. He wants to offer you early admission to their aerospace engineering program with a full scholarship." Sarah's heart skipped. "Are you serious?" Principal Crawford announced it during the morning faculty meeting. "Apparently, Dr. Williams was so impressed by your science fair project, or what he could see of it, before it was destroyed, that he tracked down your research notes and methodology. He said your work on atmospheric pressure dynamics was graduate-level quality." For a moment, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of how far she'd come. 6 months ago, she'd been a scholarship kid desperately trying to survive in a hostile environment. Now she was being recruited by universities and respected by peers who had once dismissed her as unworthy of their notice. "There's more," Jacob continued. "The school is naming the new science scholarship after your atmospheric pressure project. The Sarah Mitchell Excellence Award will help other kids like us who have the brains, but not the bank accounts." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Having her name on a scholarship meant that her struggle hadn't been in vain. It would help other students who found themselves in similar situations. During lunch, she sat with a diverse group of friends who had gravitated toward her not because of her father's dramatic helicopter arrival, but because they recognized in her the kind of quiet strength and integrity they wanted to emulate. The cafeteria conversation ranged from quantum physics to social justice, from college applications to weekend plans that didn't involve putting others down for entertainment. "Sarah," said David Kim, the student council president who had taken over many of Madison's former leadership roles, "we're organizing a peer mentorship program for new scholarship students. Would you consider being a founding mentor?" "I'd love to," Sarah replied. "But I think the program should include all students, not just scholarship kids." The problem at Westfield wasn't economic diversity. It was the culture that treated differences as threats instead of strengths. David nodded thoughtfully. You're right. Let's design something that brings everyone together instead of maintaining the divisions. After school, Sarah found her father waiting in the parking lot, not in the helicopter this time, but in his truck. The contrast no longer embarrassed her. She'd learned that true worth came from character and achievement, not from the vehicle you drove or the neighborhood you lived in. "How was your day, kiddo?" Mike asked as she climbed into the passenger seat. "Dr. Williams offered me early admission to the university," she said, unable to contain her excitement. Mike's face lit up with pride. "That's fantastic. You've earned every bit of it." As they drove through downtown Millbrook, Sarah noticed something different about her father. The quiet mechanic who had once seemed diminished by his transition from commercial aviation had reclaimed his confidence. Standing up for his daughter had reminded him of his own capabilities and worth. "Dad," Sarah said as they passed Mitchell's auto repair, "do you ever miss flying?" Mike considered the question carefully. "I thought I did. But I've realized that being grounded doesn't mean being diminished. Some of the most important flights aren't about altitude. They're about being there when your family needs you." That evening, Sarah sat in her room working on college applications, no longer the anxious, isolated girl who had started at Westfield months earlier. Her personal essay wrote itself a story about resilience, justice, and the power of having someone believe in you when the world seems determined to tear you down. Her phone buzzed with a text from Trevor Ashford. "Sarah, I know this is probably weird coming from me, but I wanted to say thank you. The counseling your dad made me go through, it helped me realize how messed up I'd become. I'm sorry for everything, and I'm glad you didn't give up on Westfield." Sarah stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "People can change when they choose to. I'm glad you made that choice." A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Mike entered carrying the small wrapped package. "This came for you today." Sarah opened it to find a scale model of a Bell 407 helicopter, the same aircraft her father had used to deliver justice to Westfield. A note was attached: "For the girl who taught me that sometimes the most important landings happen on solid ground. Love, Dad." "It's perfect," Sarah said, placing the model on her desk where it caught the light from her window. "You know," Mike said, settling into the chair beside her desk, "when I was flying commercial routes, I used to think success was measured in altitude and airspeed. But watching you these past months has taught me something different." "What's it?" "That real success is measured in how you handle turbulence. Not just surviving it, but using it to become a stronger pilot." He smiled at his daughter, seeing not just the girl he'd raised, but the confident young woman she was becoming. "You've earned your wings, Sarah. The question now is what kind of flight plan you want to file for the future." Sarah looked out her window toward the horizon, where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of possibility. Westfield Preparatory Academy had tested her in ways she'd never imagined, but she'd emerged not just victorious, but transformed. Bullies who had tried to break her had instead revealed her strength. The system that had attempted to exclude her had been forced to acknowledge her worth. And the father who had always been her hero had proven that love could move mountains, or at least land helicopters exactly where they needed to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to stand up for those who needed an advocate. But tonight, Sarah Mitchell sat in her room above her father's garage, surrounded by acceptance letters and scholarship offers, planning a future that stretched as far as her courage could carry her. The girl who had once felt invisible had learned to soar, and she was just getting started. The mechanic's daughter had found her wings, and the sky was calling. 1 year later, Sarah Mitchell stood at the podium in Westfield Preparatory Academy's main auditorium, looking out at an audience that included students, faculty, parents, and distinguished guests. The same room where she had once felt invisible now welcomed her as the keynote speaker for the school's first annual Character and Courage Awards ceremony. "A year ago," Sarah began, her voice carrying the confidence that comes from surviving storms and emerging stronger. I walked into this school believing that fitting in meant making myself smaller. I thought success meant avoiding conflict and hoping that kindness alone would be enough to earn acceptance. In the audience, Dr. Williams from the State University nodded approvingly. Sarah had not only excelled in her early admission program, but had also become a student advocate, working with university administration to develop support systems for first-generation college students. What I learned, Sarah continued, is that sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone who comes after you. Sometimes making waves is the only way to change the current. Principal Crawford, who had undergone her own transformation over the past year, watched with genuine pride. The woman who had once prioritized donor relations over student welfare had become a nationally recognized advocate for educational equity. Westfield's anti-bullying program was now being studied and replicated by schools across the country. In the back row, Trevor Ashford sat with his younger sister, who would be starting at Westfield in the fall. His community service hours had evolved into a passion for social justice advocacy, and he now worked with the peer mentorship program Sarah had helped design. The experience had taught him that true leadership meant lifting others up, not tearing them down. The helicopter that landed in our parking lot that day, Sarah said with a slight smile, became a symbol that resonated far beyond our school. But the real power wasn't in the dramatic arrival. It was in the quiet preparation that made that moment possible. She gestured toward the audience where her father sat, wearing a suit instead of his work clothes, but still carrying himself with the same steady confidence that had impressed everyone that day. Mike Mitchell had been invited to speak at educational conferences about parental advocacy, sharing strategies for supporting children who faced institutional barriers. My father taught me that pilots spend countless hours preparing for situations they hope never to encounter. They study weather patterns, memorize emergency procedures, and maintain their skills not because they expect disaster, but because they know that when a crisis comes, there's no time to learn what you should have known before takeoff. In the audience, Jacob Torres beamed with pride. Now student body president, he had helped establish the scholarship fund that bore Sarah's name. 5 students had already benefited from the program, each bringing their own unique perspectives and talents to Westfield's increasingly diverse community. The Sarah Mitchell Excellence Award, Sarah continued, isn't just about academic achievement. It's about recognizing that true excellence comes from perseverance in the face of adversity, from choosing courage over comfort, and from using your success to create opportunities for others. The ceremony continued with the presentation of awards to students who had demonstrated exceptional character, leadership, and advocacy for their peers. The recipients included former bullies who had genuinely transformed their behavior, bystanders who had found the courage to speak up, and new students who had thrived because of the supportive environment that now existed at Westfield. After the ceremony, Sarah found herself surrounded by younger students seeking advice and inspiration. A shy freshman named Maria approached hesitantly. "I'm starting here next month," Maria said quietly. "I'm on scholarship too, and I'm scared I won't fit in." Sarah knelt down to Maria's eye level, remembering her own first day and the fear that had seemed so overwhelming at the time. "The secret," she said gently, "isn't fitting in. It's finding where you belong and helping create space for others who need it too." Later that evening, at the reception following the ceremony, Sarah mingled with guests who had come to witness Westfield's transformation. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a researcher studying anti-bullying interventions, approached with genuine curiosity. "Your story has become a case study in our program," Dr. Martinez said. "What do you think was the crucial turning point?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think it was when I realized that my father's intervention wasn't just about protecting me. It was about protecting every student who might face similar challenges." The helicopter landing was dramatic, but the real change came from the systematic documentation, the legal accountability, and the institutional reforms that followed. Dr. Martinez nodded, taking notes. And what advice would you give to other students facing similar situations? Document everything. Build alliances with people who share your values. Don't suffer in silence. There are adults who will listen and act if they have the information they need. And remember that the bully's power often comes from the assumption that no one will challenge them. As the reception wound down, Sarah stepped outside onto the school's terrace, where the same helicopter that had changed everything now sat as a permanent display donated by her father and converted into an educational exhibit about aerodynamics. And Courage. Mike joined her, both of them looking at the aircraft that had become an unlikely symbol of hope and justice. Any regrets? He asked. Sarah shook her head. None. The experience taught me things I never could have learned any other way. It showed me what real strength looks like, what authentic friendship means, and how important it is to have people who believe in you unconditionally. What's next for you? Sarah smiled, pulling out her phone to show him her latest acceptance letter. Métis called yesterday. They want me to join their aerospace engineering program with a focus on flight safety systems. Apparently, my essay about using aviation principles to navigate social challenges impressed their admissions committee. Mike's eyes misted with pride. From the mechanics garage to MAT, that's quite a flight plan. The garage taught me that complex problems can be solved with the right tools and enough patience, Sarah said. Métis will teach me to design those tools for others. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the campus that had once felt like enemy territory but now felt like home. The transformation hadn't been easy. Real change never was, but it had been worth every difficult moment. You know, Mike said thoughtfully, when I first landed that helicopter here, I was focused on protecting you. I didn't realize I was also teaching a lesson about what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept extraordinary injustice. Sarah nodded. The best part is watching other students find their own courage. Trevor organized anti-bullying workshops. Jacob created support networks for scholarship students. Even Brittany using her family's connections to fund programs for underprivileged kids. And you? Mike asked. What's your next mission? Sarah's eyes sparkled with determination. I'm working with a team of student advocates to create a national network connecting students who face similar challenges and helping them support each other. We're calling it the Upward Current Project. Like aviation terminology? Exactly. Updrafts help aircraft gain altitude. We want to help students facing adversity find the currents that will lift them higher instead of the downdrafts that pull them down. As they prepared to leave Westfield for the evening, Sarah took one last look at the school that had challenged her, changed her, and ultimately celebrated her. The girl who had once hidden in corners now walked confidently through hallways where her portrait hung in the Hall of Honor, not because of her father's dramatic intervention, but because of her own courage and character. The mechanic's daughter had learned to fly, but more importantly, she had learned to help others find their wings. The helicopter in the parking lot would remain as a reminder that justice could arrive from unexpected directions, but the real legacy was in the lives transformed and the culture changed. Sarah Mitchell had discovered that true victory wasn't about defeating bullies, it was about creating a world where bullying couldn't survive. And as she drove away from Westfield with her father, planning her next adventure at MET and beyond, she knew that the most important flights were still ahead of her. The sky, after all, belonged to everyone brave enough to claim it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us